You're listening to the Potaholics Comedy Network. Potaholics.com.
Welcome to Codex, a history of video games. My name is Tyler Osby.
And I'm Mike Coletta.
And today we're talking about Chapter 19 in The Ultimate History of Video Games by Stephen L. Kent. This chapter is called The Birth of Sega. Mike, take it away.
I'm here, ready to take it away.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just a warning to the listeners up top. I am having some fun allergies right now, so I sound a little nasally. Apologies in advance. If I sniffle, I will edit it out of the podcast. That's my promise to you.
Hold you to that.
Yeah, also, if you're a fan of me butchering the Japanese language, this is going to be a great episode for you. So here we go.
Because Sega's a Japanese company? Is that why?
No. Ooh. Interestingly enough, origins of the word Sega. Sega is an abbreviated form of service games. The company is headquartered in Japan and has the style of corporate culture.
Like that Japanese style of corporate culture?
But it was founded by two Americans.
What? When?
So it started in 1952. That's when service games began. And in order for us to talk about this, we have to talk about two things. Service games, the company, and a separate entity, a person named David Rosen. So first, we're going to talk about service games. The company is called Service Games. It's not a type of game. It confused me a little bit in the book when I was reading it, but I got over it. It began in May of 1952, shortly after the laws were passed restricting slot machines in the United States.
Was that because they were gambling?
Yes. Because before these laws, there was a man named Marty Bromley, and he managed slot machines and game rooms over several military bases in the U.S. then territory of Hawaii.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That sounds like a good gig.
He made good money. He had a business out of it. But after that law was passed in 1951, Bromley and his father bought the games from the government and shipped them all to Japan. And Japan at this time, by the way, was not doing great after World War II.
Yeah. They did. Yeah.
It didn't go well. Most of the industries were either depleted or destroyed, and Japan was essentially a third world country, is how it was described in the book. Nice. Bromley then set out a business where he branched out into jukeboxes and opened a manufacturing plant called, here's my first butchering of the Japanese language, Nippon Kikai Seizo. And by 1960, Nippon Kikai Seizo, a.k.a. Service Games, was one of the largest coin-op entertainment companies in Japan. Not just video games. Like, the jukeboxes were what they were really.
Okay.
That was their business.
They were selling jukeboxes. Were they selling other stuff, too?
Yeah, they had some games after David Rosen, which we'll get to in a second. Like, David Rosen pioneered the game aspect, but Service Games actually got almost all of their business from these jukeboxes. Taito was another big player, and then David Rosen's company, Rosen Enterprises Limited, was the other company that he was competing with. So there were three big companies. And while Bromley worked in the U.S., he had two partners that stayed in Japan and managed the whole business, and their names are Dick Stewart, which is the most 1950s name ever, and Ray Lemaire. And in 1964, David Rosen joined up with them, and they merged Service Games and Rosen Enterprises Limited into one company called Sega. That beautiful. That was essentially the TLDL version.
TLDL. Too long didn't listen.
Yeah,
but they did listen. You did listen.
You listened that far, and now we're going to get into the real specifics of it. So, David Rosen, he was in the U.S. Air Force during the Korean War, and he was described as being friendly, but quietly intimidating at the same time, which I don't know what that means.
That's how I would describe myself.
Really? You're friendly, but quietly intimidating? By the way, he's staring at me right now, and I am very intimidated.
Yes, and I didn't say anything.
He actually started his first business before being discharged from the Air Force. He worked in art, believe it or not. Rosen's first business idea is he would send pictures from the U.S. to Japan, where they would be turned into painted portraits. So he'd get pictures from the U.S., send them to Japan, they'd paint them, send them back.
That's just a Photoshop filter now.
Essentially, yeah. He was a mail order Photoshop filter.
Gotcha.
The business failed. It didn't do well.
Probably because it could have just used Photoshop.
I mean, yeah, definitely.
In 1950.
In the 50s. Rosen then decided that he was going to go back to Japan and study the people and what they needed. And it was there that he found his first big idea. And in Japan in the 1950s, it was necessary to have a photo ID to do anything because it was essentially under United States occupation. Mm-hmm. So at the time, people would wait 2 or 3 days to have their photos done. But David Rosen realized that in the U.S., they had these photo booths that could do this job in minutes called photomat booths.
Oh, boy.
So he's like, why don't we have photomat booths in Japan? Makes no sense. Why don't we do that?
Yeah.
So photomath booths, by the way, they looked essentially like photo booths today, except not digital. So what they would do, and this is the reason that there was a big problem why he couldn't just bring those photomath booths over, is the pictures would last maybe a year or two.
Oh.
Because they would fade over time because there was no negatives. They were printed just straight up onto paper, and then that style paper, either light or heat, would change that photograph and make it fade over time. So Rosen decided that in order for it to be an official ID, he'd have to make these picture booths last for 4 to 5 years minimum. Like the pictures from the booths would have to last for 4 to 5 years. And he realized that the booths never created negatives. And so he was going to change that. So he would just, instead, he hired people. It's kind of funny because the booths were automatic, in quotes. There were 100% like people behind the automatic cameras in the booths.
Just like it's like the Flintstones, where it's like when you're talking to a walkie-talkie, you're just speaking to a bird, and then the bird flies and like says it to somebody.
It's exactly like that. It's a Flintstone photo booth. So what happens is you'd walk into a booth, you take the picture with the automatic camera. Behind that camera is a person who gets the negative and develops that photo for you right then and there on the spot, and sticks it out a slot 3 to 4 minutes later.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was what a photomat booth was. The booths were super successful, I should say. They like completely blew away the market because at the time you'd hire a photographer for 250 yen to do this, and his booths only charged 150 to 200 yen depending on where you were. They were called photoramas, or again, second Japanese term I'm going to butcher. Here we go. Nifun shashin, which translates to 2-minute photo. Yeah. Rosen in the book even says that over a short period of time, he was able to set up hundreds of these Photorama locations throughout Japan. They were so popular because it essentially provided a service that was instant.
Yeah, you got to go take selfies with your friends.
Yeah, and he expedited this process for this IDs, which was really important. The overnight success of the photo booths, though, was initially its downfall because photographers started complaining to the U.S. consulate, like, hey, this guy just stole all our business.
Oh.
I can't take pictures anymore because now they get done instantly. So Rosen, in response, said, okay, what I'll do is I'll franchise the Photorama booths. This, however, did not go the way he wanted it to. But because once he started franchising his booths, knockoffs popped up, like knockoff Photoramas. And those ones ended up just destroying his whole market.
He didn't like have a patent on that or anything?
He didn't have a patent on it. He couldn't get a patent in time. The downfall of most video game businesses, we find.
You got to get that patent.
Hey, if you're going to start a new video game company, get some patents in you.
Yep.
In you? Sure, why not? Rosen was doing fine, though, like financially. He had a couple new ventures going that were a little more game-oriented.
Service game oriented?
Ooh, maybe. Yeah. So the Korean War brought a lot of business to Japan. Tokyo was essentially used as a base of operations during the war, and there were a lot of American military there. So Rosen decided he wanted to import luxury items from the States. There were 3 classes of items. The first was like necessities, and the second was like not necessarily luxuries, but stuff you'd kind of like need, in a pinch. And then luxuries were like your items. This is all fun. This is all for leisure. And electromechanical games qualified for that.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so
I would argue that I need them to live, but
I know. I think for
you,
you, it's a necessity.
Yeah, I don't know if I could get that by the government.
The way it worked was he had to ask the Ministry of International Trade and Industry for a license to purchase electromechanical game machines and bring them to Japan. And then finally, after a lot of coercing, he got permission to purchase $100,000 worth of machines and bring them back to Japan. The key here with Rosen, though, is buying these games in America. It was like during the downturn of the United States amusement market.
So you got them cheap?
Yeah, it was a buyer's market. That was another thing that equated to his success. Like with old owners trying to offload their games, Rosen typically got a machine for $200 or less. And he had to pay MITI usually double that amount, and then he had to ship the machines there. So it cost around $1,000 for him to send machines to Japan.
Each machine was like
each machine. And the games were mostly all shooting games. So one popular game was Bear Gun.
Shooting bears?
Yeah, it tells you exactly what it is in the title.
Yeah.
I love it.
Well, it could be confusing, right? Is it a gun that shoots bears? Bear gun?
Oh, like a bear shooting gun?
Yeah.
That would be even more dangerous than a normal gun, I'd imagine.
Yeah.
In
Can
my
you fight
mind-
bears with bears?
Yeah, in my mind, it's a gun, like a normal size gun, and it shoots out a projectile, and the projectile expands into a full size bear, and then attacks the other bears that are shooting out of the other guns. Very, very destructible stuff.
It's like a weird Pokemon, like Pokeball thing.
a Pokeball gun.
Yeah.
I just shot like 18
shoots bears.
Pikachus at you. They're everywhere. The thing about Bear Gun is the machine was huge. It was super heavy. The players stood 15 feet from the target, so already it's taken up a lot of space. But these machines were virtually indestructible, is how they were designed. They were super heavy, strong mechanical parts. Like, you're not going to break this thing. So when he moved these machines over, they were all in good shape, and he only charged about 20 yen a game, which was about 10 cents in US dollars at the time.
Okay.
Yeah,
Which is probably roughly competitive with at least how things were in the U.S. at the time.
That was the exact price of most games in the U.S. at the time, which we're going to get to later. There's something about that later that was really cool to find out. Rosen still had all his locations from the Photorama business, though, so he started putting game machines there instead of his photo booths. And then the money just started flowing in.
Just watching it, just having to scoop it up with a shovel.
Just gangbusters.
Scrooge McDuck. Hotcakes.
Hotcakes, gangbusters, Scrooge McDuckin.
Yeah.
Just living his life. Within a year, the MITI, that ministry we talked about earlier, would let him bring $200,000 and more in amusement games.
They were
over
into
to
it.
Japan. They were so into it. They're like, this guy's doing it. And they needed stuff for the troops to do.
Yeah.
You know?
This is super fun.
Yeah, look how fun this is. Trade-in games were also a way that Rosen got cheap machines because operators at the time in the United States would trade in an old electromechanical game like this to the distributor, and they usually get like $50 or $100 off their next one. Mm-hmm. But then what happened is these old machines that were traded in would just sit in the warehouse of the distributor. And Rosen's like, I'll buy these from you. All these old games. Because it doesn't matter. He just wants games. He just wants to have locations, large amounts of games everywhere.
David Rosen got tons of games.
He's got so many games. That's the key to success. You have to have so many games. And he became known as like a really big customer for people in like these arcade distributors. Rosen also had a lot of help from his close relationship with the owners of Toho and Zochiku movie theater chains in Japan. He actually put arcade machines in all of their lobbies, which I was wondering, I'm like, is this the origin of the movie theater arcade?
Oh, could be. I mean, that's a good place to put them. People
Great
are
place to
sitting
go.
there just waiting to see a movie.
I would totally play Bear Gun in a Regal theater.
Oh, yeah.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's be the first ones to do that. And also, his biggest competitors right now were service games with their Sega, in quotation, line of jukeboxes, and Taito, founded by Michael Kogan. But the book says that while they were very competitive, and this is really important, is they were all very close still. Like, they all knew each other personally. It was a competitive business between the three of them, but hey,
But they were buddies.
we're buddies still.
Yeah. I like to think that the Sega jukebox, like before every song that plays, it's just like Sega.
I would hope
And it
so.
starts playing, I don't know, Elvis Presley, which was
That's
the
probably what
style
it would
at
be.
the time.
Yeah, definitely that. Rosen tried some other new amusement ventures at this time. After the arcades took off, he's like, I gotta design another thing. The first thing he did, which I thought was really cool, was indoor golfing. You know when you like see the people that like swing at like a Dick's Sporting Goods or whatever?
Oh, yeah, and it like spins around.
and the
thing.
ball hits the mat.
Oh,
and then
yeah.
they can read their swing. This is like
Yeah.
an early version of that, and he
Oh, that's
built
cool.
indoor golf courses based on this. I think it had like a chip that read the speed of the ball and the curve and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But in Japan, Japanese people saw golf as an outdoor hobby, and they're like, "Why this thing doesn't work?"
Why wouldn't I just go play regular golf?
yeah, and so it didn't really pick up any interest. So then he decided to do slot car racing. You know, like with the track and the slot and the car. I just described what I just said. And
There's a slot, it's car, and racing.
and a track. And this actually became like a fad. Like, it kind of picked up some steam. It was like a really quick fad. It was kind of like a Teddy Ruxpin, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
it was like one summer. It was like, all
yeah,
the
like,
kids were
this is
playing
awesome. And then it kind of faded away. But then he was offered his big business, which was to establish a bowling alley in Tokyo for a company called AMF.
Adios.
Which is also the name of a horrible drink. I thought,
Yeah.
I thought the exact same thing when I looked it up. The first bowling alley he built was a 14-lane alley on top of a movie theater in Shinjuku, which is a high traffic area in Tokyo, like a busy neighborhood. I think a very nice neighborhood too. It was an engineering feat because the movie theater was under the bowling alley, and they couldn't allow the lanes to make any noise or vibrations whatsoever, which is kind of cool. They pulled it off.
Wow.
If you were in those movie theaters, you did not know people were bowling above you.
That's
at
pretty
all.
cool.
Yeah. These bowling alleys were a huge success, and I now have a quote from David Rosen about this that I'm going to read to you, Tyler.
Okay.
It's just like in school when people would read to you. Mm-hmm. Are you excited about it?
Oh, I'm so excited.
You ready for it?
Yep.
Here
Definitely.
it comes.
Hit me with that quote.
Quote from David Rosen. This particular bowling center went on to establish records in the bowling industry. The way they measure the success of a bowling alley is by lines bowled in a day. At that point in time, a typical bowling center in the United States would do 40 to 45 lines per day. The centers that held records were situated in Hawaii. They were doing about 60 per day. We did 110 per day.
Whoa.
We only closed 4 hours a day between 2 and 6 in the morning. We were originally open 24 hours, but the police said, please close for a few hours, end quote. So yeah, he was crushing the bowling industry.
Nice.
Like, he was destroying it, which I thought was really cool. And you'd think, oh, I did this. I should open bowling alleys everywhere and make tons of money.
I would totally do that.
But what happened was other bowling companies, like big bowling alley companies, saw, like Brunswick was one that's very popular. They saw the success and they moved in immediately. Like it was before he could even start planning other ones. That they just moved in super quickly. So thanks to his theater arcades, though, David Rosen had the biggest amusement game company in the business, though. And his rivals were very close to him, but he was definitely a standout. Mm-hmm. But then with smaller companies popping up in 1964, Rosen proposed a partnership with the two other big companies, Michael Kogan of Taito and the three men who controlled Service Games, or Sega. Kogan eventually decided he didn't want to join. He's like, I don't want to join up with you. But then Marty Bromley, Dick Stewart, and Ray Lemaire all joined with Rosen and formed Sega Enterprises Limited.
So they were buddies competing, and now they're buddies cooperating.
Yeah, now they're buddies. It's in real life. It's really cool. And while Rosen, I should mention, had the amusement games market down, and he was winning in that, he was number one in that, Service Games was a way bigger company.
Yeah.
Because they had the jukebox business. Their jukebox chain reached 6,000 locations. They had a giant manufacturing facility where they'd make these jukeboxes and several bowling alley arcades and almost 30 branch offices, too.
Wow. That's pretty big.
They were a big company. But under the merger, Rosen became the president and CEO of Sega, and within a year of taking over, Rosen used Sega's manufacturing plant to build games.
So he did the old infiltration takeover. Mm-hmm. Got him. But they were buddies, so they were probably all cool with it.
Yeah, my thing was, I kind of wonder how, I mean, it's a good deal for Rosen if he was able to merge the companies and get this much larger company on board, and then he became the person running it all.
Yeah.
But the reason he did this, the reason he started building games in Sega's manufacturing plants is these old shooting games like Bear Gun were just really old and outdated. Like they weren't up to modern standards. And while Rosen bought new games, usually for like $650 more instead of $200, the Japanese market, like, they didn't really notice and they didn't really care. So he's like, I want to do something that blows people away.
Yeah.
And that's when Rosen decided to make a new game called Periscope, which we actually mentioned once already.
Yeah, we've talked about this one before.
And I kind of was confused about it when we talked about it before. I thought it was definitely a video game. This was more of a novelty game. Mm-hmm. Like, definitely more of like the way, like, you'd look through a periscope, the lights, you'd shoot your torpedoes with lights and you'd knock out these ships with lights. But the waves of the water were like plastic sheets that would like move up and down to simulate the ocean. And the whole goal was to shoot down enemy ships. And if you shot down smaller ships, you'd get more points because they're harder to hit.
Okay.
And the game was a lot more expensive to play.
It sounds like it was really complicated.
It was 30 yen. So
boy.
twice as much as the other games.
So
were.
nearly a quarter then in U.S.
Yeah, definitely almost a quarter. And Periscope was so successful that distributors from the U.S. and European markets came to check it out. They're like, we got to look at this game.
Yeah.
It's crushing it in Japan.
Sega's got games.
Sega's got so many games. But the problem with Periscope is the engineers had not designed the game for international use or international travel.
But when ship it across the ocean?
Yeah, but when it was weird, they couldn't ship Periscope across the ocean.
Oh, ironic.
So strange. Where's Alanis? She knows. But what happened was when Sega started seeing how many offers they were getting to purchase these machines, they're like, you know what? Fill the offers, and then we'll just engineer this game and modify it to ship.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah, so they ended up altering the game to make it so it could ship. And the Periscope was very, very expensive for distributors to purchase at the time. It was $1,295.
Ooh, that's pretty spendy in 1964.
Yeah,
65.
64. Yeah, it was very, very well, I guess 65, you're right. Way more expensive than any other game at the time. And when they complained to Rosen, he's like, okay, just charge 25 cents to play instead of 10 cents. And this is where the 25-cent arcade price comes from.
Oh, because it became acceptable when games were that good. They were like, oh, yeah, you can totally charge a quarter now.
And this is where it all began. And keep in mind, this is also way, way before the arcade boom. This is novelty games right now, which we haven't really touched on a lot in the podcast, I think. So,
no, we talked about it in like some of the earlier episodes, but we didn't like talk in a lot of detail about it just because they kind of set up for.
Yeah, they're just kind of set up for video games. But Periscope really put Sega on the map. They're like, look at this game; it's so good. In the book, Eddie Adlam is quoted. He's a publisher for Replay Magazine, and he described Periscope as being 10 feet deep, 6 feet wide, and 6 feet high. So this is a big game.
It takes a lot of space.
Yeah, and it was like one of those games too, where people would just come in off the street and crowd around it because they're like, what is this thing? Like,
it's so big
and it's so crazy and it looks really elaborate. He also said it was probably one of the great successful novelty machines ever made. Like
nice.
it would make so much money. And Periscope started a pattern at Sega of creating and exporting games instead of importing them like they used to. So now they're making about 10 new games a year in their prime. And they were doing so well, they thought about a public offering. But then the four of them got together and they were like, I don't know if a public offering is what we really want to do. Because I think some of them were trying to retire.
Yeah.
And they're like, but maybe we should just sell. And that's ended up what happened. They just sold the company to Gulf and Western in 1967. So Sega is sold to the company Gulf and Western. And the stipulation of the sale was Rosen had to remain as CEO and chairman of the company through 1972. But he got to have his headquarters in whatever city he chose.
Oh.
So at first he went to Hawaii for a couple months. He was like, I don't know, I want to try Hawaii out. Didn't work. So then he ended up settling his headquarters of Sega in Hong Kong. And Rosen stayed there until 1976. He had made like a really strong relationship with Charlie Bluedorn, who was the chairman, and Jim Judelson, the president of Gulf and Western. So he became really buddy-buddy with these guys. Okay. And I think this is how business works. They're like, hey, we go golfing a lot, and we hang out.
Yeah, we become buddies, and then we do that.
It's the 60s, so they're probably like, we're just drinking lots of booze on planes and eating steaks that are mostly raw. Being mean to people.
Yeah.
That's probably what happened.
And stealing other people's identities.
That's right. They wanted to make Rosen a partner in Gulf and Western and have him establish a Far East conglomerate. But due to market conditions at the time, he could not have an acquisition program of that type. Like, it was illegal for him to become the, I almost said ruler. That's not the right word. The CEO of this Far East conglomerate of Gulf and Western. So instead, because Bluedorn and Judelson liked him so much, they're like, you're going to become the chairman, CEO, and second largest shareholder of Sega, a now United States listed company. This is where Sega of America comes from.
Oh, yeah.
So he ended up, he sold the business of Sega Japan to Gulf and Western, and they're like, this market is so great, and we see this arcade boom on the horizon. You're now going to take Sega to the United States, and you're going to run it there. And so Sega teamed up with a manufacturing company called Gremlin, great name for a company.
Oh, yeah.
Where they ended the 1970s as a major supplier of video games in the United States and Europe. So that was a lot, right?
Yeah.
Okay, because that's
the history up till we still haven't even got to the video game part.
No, we haven't, and we got a little bit to go. And this is I'm about to say a lot of stuff. That was a lot very quickly. Mm-hmm. But this is a list that I feel like it's a lot of details and it's quick, and I'm going to take some time between just to and maybe if you have questions, Tyler, it might help answer some of the audience questions they have. This is a lot. Here we go.
Okay.
First thing, Rosen predicted the fall of the arcade industry coming. He saw it coming. He actually did a speech saying that manufacturers and distributors should slow down production of new games and start selling enhancement kits to the operators instead.
General Computer.
Yeah.
Talk to our dudes over at General Computer.
Yeah, but his speech was considered blasphemy by the industry, and he was actually booed by people for this comment, but he saw it coming.
Huh.
Okay, the second thing that happened after this, Bluedorn asks Rosen to join the Paramount Group, and he actually leaves Sega and moves to the Paramount lot, the studios.
Oh, okay.
And then Barry Diller, the chairman of Paramount, and Michael Eisner, sound familiar, the president of
Paramount.
Paramount at the time, they joined the Sega board, so they'll kind of like switch places.
Okay. And Eisner would later be the president of Disney.
That's right. Yeah, that's why I'm like, oh, I actually know that name. And third, in late 1981, Rosen proposed to Gulf and Western that they should buy out all the minority shareholders in Sega, including himself. He's like, you should buy us all out. And this is kind of a clever move by Rosen because he sees that collapse coming soon. So he said he would stay on as a corporate advisor, and it is from after they sell the shares. Like, he watches kind of from the sidelines the collapse of the arcade industry. So he's doing okay still.
He's like, I told you.
Yeah, the crash, it was bad, but it didn't really affect him. After the crash, Gulf and Western sell Sega US, the US branch of Sega, to Bally and Midway.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that they were owned by Bally and Midway at one point.
Yeah, so they
That's
sell
crazy.
Sega United States goes to Bally and Midway. And you're like, okay, what happens to the Japanese version of Sega? This is the next thing. Rosen is offered the opportunity to buy back the Japanese operation of Sega for $38 million. Rosen does not have $38 million, as far as I know. But he assembles a team of backers to help him out. And they take control of Sega Japan in 1984. And he appoints Hayao Nakayama. He was one of the backers of this project as the CEO.
Okay.
So he becomes Nakayama becomes the CEO of Sega Japan, but Rosen is still very much involved. I want to say he's like on the board. I'm guessing that's how that
he's
works.
Probably doing something.
I'm learning a lot about business on this podcast, like way more than I thought I would.
Yeah.
Finally, after witnessing the crash of the arcade market, Nakayama sets his sights on home products because he saw something in this little console from this company called Nintendo in the Famicom. And he's like, I think we need to build something of our own.
We can do that.
And boom, that right there is the origins of Sega. So that was a lot. And like,
Wow. So now this is where we get to
now
video
this is
games.
right where they start to build consoles.
Oh, yeah.
So I just did the whole history of Sega. Little arcade games, little novelty games. There was a war. There was the after war.
Yep.
It's pretty intense.
There's a lot going on there, man.
I get really excited. This is one of the nerdiest things I've ever admitted on this podcast. When history, like major history that we know, like world wars or like financial collapses, you get to see how it affects video games.
Yeah.
And I'm really interested in that. And it was interesting because I don't think this explosion of video games in Japan, I mean, it was all started by essentially U.S. people because of the downfall of Japan in World War II.
Yeah, they were over there kind of doing stuff.
Yeah, it was really weird. Not saying it would never have happened, but I'm like, I definitely think it would have been way different otherwise. So
it's weird that it's this Japanese company in Japan started by Americans that would later have an American branch that, that's real.
it's really crazy. And I didn't know that was like so jumping around so much, but I just thought it was really interesting. And so we're going to get next week, we're going to talk a little bit about both Sega and Nintendo.
Oh, yes. We're going to get a little bit of a taste of some console wars
We're going to
here.
get a little taste of console wars. We're going to get in some very, very famous games. One game, near and dear to my heart, just gives me almost an awakening of sorts.
A Link's Awakening?
Yeah, it's like reading it as a link to my past.
Oh.
It gives me wild breathing. And the only way Tyler can calm me down is if he plays a very obscure instrument that allows me to travel back in time. If you don't know what game we're talking about, you're going to find out next week.
Ah, yes.
Tyler.
I'm also a big fan.
What are you playing?
I'm playing World of Warcraft now. Yeah, dude.
This is what happens. Tyler's one of those people. He starts playing games, and I just get so excited I want to play games with him. I might start a WoW account.
Oh, man. Well, you can play Starter Edition that lets you go to level 20 for free.
Let's do it.
So if you want to play some games, it's fun because I'm getting excited for the new expansion that comes out in a couple of weeks. And so I'm like leveling a new character from scratch. I haven't played a lot of WoW in the past. I did play towards the end of Cataclysm. But I haven't ever done like end game raiding with like a group of people that I think I'm going to be able to do now. I've had a taste of that with Destiny, of like what it's like to have a group of people play a game regularly. And so I'm getting excited to do that with World of Warcraft. It's so weird going through the earlier zones of the game that came out in like 2004 because it's just a bunch of ghost towns. Like there's all these like settlements and stuff that are there. For, like I was in the little pirate town in Booty Bay. That's what it's called, Booty Bay.
I know Booty Bay. I remember that.
Yeah, and like there's like an armor shop there and a weapon shop, but there are no other like actual people, just NPCs. And I'm like, has anybody ever bought anything here in the past decade? Maybe not. It's weird. It's like going through the history of a game that's 15 years old, but you're kind of doing it at an accelerated pace because you definitely level faster than you did back in the day. It really kind of weirds me out a little bit of like moving through the past kind of stuff.
I would say it's got to be, especially if they're giving you free levels up to level 20. They're trying to give you that taste.
Yeah.
So they're probably going to get you to go to 20 really fast.
Yeah.
And then like go from there. I never played it in high school.
Yeah, me neither.
All of my friends did, but I never. I'm kind of glad I didn't, because if I did, I think I would have fallen in hard.
Yeah, me too. Part of me wishes that I had played back then because I think I would have had a lot of fun. The other part of me is like, I might be a dead person now.
Yeah, I might not have a college degree. I might just be somewhere in my mother's basement. She's on a boat. She doesn't even have a basement. In her lower section of her boat.
Yeah, who knows, man.
Stairway away. It's not that far away.
Yeah, that's what I've been playing. I haven't played as much Destiny this week because I level capped on my 2 characters, and so like milestones are not that interesting to me anymore. But I do hope to raid this weekend a little bit. I still love raiding. I want to do the Prestige, Eater of Worlds, and stuff like that. So, that's about it. What have you been playing?
I started Mass Effect Andromeda finally.
Oh, nice.
I gotta say, like, I'm very early on. Cannot give a complete review, but I'm really digging it. It's got that whole Mass Effect feel to me. Granted, the story is a problem apparently, but I haven't really gotten far enough to know what that problem is yet. I'm just having a good time.
That's good. Yeah, well, let me know because that's one I haven't played yet.
Yeah, because you were the one that told me about the deal, the $12 on Amazon deal.
Oh, yeah.
That's where we got it, and I was just like, I'm only about buying games and deals now.
Yeah,
so
I don't pay full price for games.
Yeah, I bought that for $12, and then I also, because of the Xbox sale, I bought Star Wars Battlefront 2 for $15 because I'm
nice.
like, that's enough money to spend to play that campaign mode that I've always wanted to play.
Yep.
And then if there's no one online, it's like whatever.
I hear the campaign's not bad.
The campaign, I played part of it on PlayStation at a friend's house, and Toby is just really wailing on his collar right now. But he's our favorite cat, so
he's the show cat. So
he's the show cat. Toby, podcast producer Toby, in the studio,
he's got a bell on his collar,
being very unprofessional, making all sorts of noise. But yeah, I'm playing a Mass Effect Andromeda. I've been trading with my roommate Pokemon and Pokemon Go. If you listen to the podcast and you want to trade Pokemon with me in Pokemon Go, just message us, and I totally will do that with you.
Oh yeah.
Don't mean to get all whispery and creepy, but I just get really excited to play Pokemon with people.
Yeah. Oh, I was playing Pokemon Alpha Sapphire. I have fallen off a little bit on that.
Yeah, I get with I said Game Boy again. With Nintendo 2DS games, I've been like on and off kind of. I just pick it up when I feel like it.
Yeah.
Like I'll turn on a TV show I've seen before, and then I'll just sit on my couch and play Pokemon. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, that's great.
So, well, thank you so much for listening. As always, you can email us at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com. I am on Twitter at mecoletta, MECOLETTA. Tyler is on Twitter at SneakerElf, ELPH.
Yep.
That's how you end that.
Yeah.
And then also, we got 2 new ratings. Thank you so much for that. We're at 5 stars. It feels great.
Yes.
If you again, we don't really advertise the show in any way, so if you could tell your friends about it, that'd be really great. If you could rate and review us, that'd be really great. It'd make us feel really alive and warm.
It does. We check them all the time, and when we see 5 stars, we're like, yes.
I get so excited. I text
really
Tyler
makes my day.
immediately
Yeah.
if I see a change. And also, just thank you so much for listening. Like, it feels really good having listeners. We see the numbers and we feel good about it.
Yeah.
And thank you so much. And it means the world to us. And is there anything... Oh, did I say codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com?
Yeah, you did.
I did?
Yep.
Okay, now I'm just repeating myself, so we got to go.
It's time to go now.
Tyler, it was great to see you.
It was great to see you too, Mike.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.
This has been a Potaholics Comedy Network presentation. Potaholics.com